Tashile, warm greetings, friends. I'd love to just kind of offer some quick, casual couch reflections on something that's more actively sparking for me right now. And it has to do with kind of Vajrayana Buddhism and maintaining the lineage as a living ecology of a view, meditation, conduct, and fruition, all kind of synchronized in a harmonious fashion, and then taking roots with kind of doing ongoing kind of stabilizing and practicing of that view, and that kind of familiarization of the meditation and the conduct that's integrated into our daily lives, and then the fruition, like kind of the results, the fruits, the kind of connective kind of explorations and kind of abundance or clarity, the additional insight that we gain from kind of maintaining and being in that kind of a living, sizzling, active kind of lineage context of view, meditation, conduct, and fruition, this living lineage ecology in Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhism. And the specific kind of reflection I'm having more recently is related to this integral approach, and kind of the distinction between actually poising the mind to take a metatheoretical approach that's actually very open, very responsive, very poised for insight, for Vipassana or supreme extraordinary seeing. Kind of like, what are the ways that you can check in with your own mind and your own heart, your own body, that'll kind of like optimally create supportive conditions for you, for your heart, your mind, your body, to kind of relax in a courageous, kind of connective fashion, and then start syncing up with the local environment you're in, the world, the people, your own thoughts and emotions. That integral approach is kind of this set of metatheoretical, you could say, it's just like a way of poising to have that connective tissue start kind of growing or deepening or taking roots. So it's an approach, it's a framework, it's a worldview. And there's like a very important distinction between the worldview that poises you for that kind of middle way approach where you're engaging life in this real living Dharma fashion, compared with actually doing that in an ongoing sustaining way where you like actually take roots, you develop kind of lineage connections, and you stay put and go deep in a living context so that you actually kind of become a living extension or a natural breath or kind of the co-creative kind of like participant of like a living ecology, of a place, of a time, of an arc, a momentum, kind of a birthing of this specific present moment. That if you stay put and get roots and kind of actually like, hang tight in a specific context, over time that you kind of sync up with in a harmonious fashion, the living ecology of that dynamic. And in Tibetan Buddhism we call that lineage. So there's the distinction that's like been really kind of very more active in my mind. The distinction between taking an open-minded approach that's poised for insight, compared with taking that approach and actually kind of being in a living, breathing context that, like, with that approach, starts to manifest deep roots, deep connective tissue, kind of like shared boundaries, shared samayas, shared guidelines, and that's all defining like a living ecology, a context, a lineage. And this is especially relevant for me because the only way we create these like very transformative middle way ecologies is by taking a middle way approach or taking an integral approach and this open-minded worldview that's deeply curious about the valuable contributions and the living dynamics of how we are with others in the world, of ourself, culture, and nature. That approach is key. It's vitally important to actually then manifesting and syncing up with local living conditions that foster greater compassion, greater wisdom, and greater power or skillful means. And this distinction is really important. The difference between an approach and then stabilizing or being with that approach in living contexts in life. So the first step for anyone who doesn't want to constantly be in a battle with life happening as if they'd take their view, their box, their preferences, and just constantly try to force their agenda on living experience. That's a very suffering-laden approach to life. If we're no longer that interested in that, or it becomes kind of dissatisfying enough that we like genuinely seek, and is there a way that's not like this, an alternative? This is where kind of the middle way view or the integral view starts to open up and gain traction from within oneself. How can I be in connection with my experience and trying to be with it and honor it and learn from it instead of fight against it all the time? The kind of bustling energy of actual lived experience. You know, when we hold a box too tightly and lived experience keeps dynamically moving within our box, it starts to push the boundaries of our box and it feels like suffering. So once we actually get a taste for, is there a way to not be like this? That's when a middle way experience starts to actually, from within oneself, gain a lot more living traction, or living kind of enthusiasm, energy. And then with that, we actually have to find a context, a place in the world, a community, a set of techniques, a living ecology that actually works with our own heart, our own mind, our own body, to actually connect up with and take roots. Because in such a hypermobile time, having an approach helps us kind of more versatility or flexibility to be in a variety of contexts and learn from a variety of experience, of stimuli, of kind of changing dynamics. But in order to really stabilize and integrate that approach, we do have to put roots somewhere. And it doesn't mean that once our roots are in, then we can no longer go anywhere else. The challenge of like actual living lineage is we have to develop or kind of deepen our roots and our connections enough in a specific time and place in a lineage. We have to go deep enough into our lineage before we're really that available to kind of learn from other living local contexts in a more deep way. So the depth that we go, that's basically as deep as we can go in a stable fashion to the depth of any other context too. So if our roots are pretty shallow, that's kind of like as deep as we'll go with any place we're at. But the one lineage we're in, wherever, however deep and kind of connective, however much we fill out that kind of lived cosmic address, to use the integral language, or kind of that just like the integrative kind of like syncing up all of our states, stages or layers, lines, ways of dancing or types, and kind of the shadow elements that are obscuring. Like how do we sync all this up as an internal harmonious ecology that then has a more robust kind of like full felt experience with where we are in the world, in place, in time, right now. And so this is all relevant to translineage questions. And a specific example in Tibetan Buddhism with this is the Rime non-sectarian movement. It wasn't just to take some bits and pieces from different lineages and create some meta-lineage or some trans-lineage approach. It was to go deep in one set of lineage practices in one local place of time and space that has a view, a meditation, a conduct, and a fruition, and to go deep in that set of worldview and the techniques and skillful means that sustain that, and to really fill out the living civilization or the ecology of what that approach actually turns on and turns off and kind of helps us be with and connect with. And as we go deep in this one spot of a lineage, we go deep enough and all of a sudden we get stable or versatile or flexible enough, then our roots can make connections outside of that local ecology in a way that boosts both ecologies, the one that we're in and then the new ones that we're exploring. And so all of a sudden we can start really appreciating the valuable contribution of multiple lineage approaches, of multiple views, of multiple meditations, conducts, and fruitions. But if we just take a universal approach, we don't really put roots anywhere, it's just mainly a metatheoretical kind of poising, but we don't really go deep in a time and place, in an ecology, and learn the system, learn the boundaries, learn what works, follow guidelines, hold ourselves in a constrained, bounded place and time. That's what a living ecology does. Without doing that, then we're always going to be skipping on the surfaces between these ecologies that we're moving through, and we'll get this kind of society of the spectacle, surface-only experience, where we just kind of, it's all just changing clothes and costumes and performances and languaging. So it's just translating, but it's not actually transforming. It's not going deep into the deep tissue, deep fiber, kind of the deep undercurrents of our mind and heart and body, of our culture and society. That if we don't do that deep layering, that deep opening, we won't be able to do it anywhere. We have to actually be kind of practical and do it in a spot before we can do it in many spots. And this seems just really key with translineage dynamics, and also with just living in such a hypermobile, fast-paced, rapidly shifting kind of concatenation of so many different systems kind of coming to interact with each other nowadays, given transportation, technology. Like, this opportunity to integrate a lot of systems and mash them up is very available, but what we seem to be getting a lot more of is a bunch of heaps of different mixes and things that come together, but they don't actually have any deep connective tissue because they're not deep. It's just surface connection. And so it becomes a disposable society of the spectacle, where every new novel thing is replaced by the next new novel thing so quickly. So that's kind of my advocating for going deep, but not doing it in an exclusive or a fundamentalist way. To actually stay put in a place doesn't mean you're rejecting other places. It means you're practically assessing, like, it takes time to develop roots. It takes time to open the mind in a poised way with a variety of experience. That takes time, and it takes time to see how my mind responds, how my body responds, how my kind of like my wakefulness responds over time when I just stay put. And that's a beautiful thing that almost any kind of meditation or contemplative practice will show us. Like, how my mind wants to bounce from staying put, from a local context. It wants to distract itself in some other place, with some other object, some other form of entertainment. To bypass actually being with the lived connections of this time and this place and this mind and this body. And a meditation holds us in a container where we follow certain structures of our body, of our speech and energy, and of our mind. We hold ourselves accountable to this living local ecology of view, meditation, conduct, and fruition, and we get to see the dynamic quality of our mind and body moving in and out of that ecology, refusing it, enjoying it, celebrating it, grieving it, being totally bored by it. And that's just called like really deep living. Instead of just skimming the surface, we're actually texturizing our experience. And I think of this more recently in terms of falling in love. Not in a romantic way, but what the mind does when it's so deeply curious about another, about a new song, a new book, a new person, a new place. Like, what the mind does temporarily, in my experience, is it kind of has this relaxed wakefulness where it's almost in like full-on receptive mode. It relaxes its agenda, and instead it's really deeply curious about the living dynamics of what's going on around it. What are you interested in? How are you moving now? When do you pause? Oh, you're kind of swept away in the living ecology of what you're actually curious about. Not just one feature, but with a real deep kind of like that honeymoon love. It's like everything grows this kind of vivid, vibrant, living, active, alive wakefulness. And all of a sudden, instead of just trying to grow one part at a time, it's in a poised state of mind where your mind is receptive to this whole ecology of all these dynamics of this thing that you're kind of surrendering to. Whether that's a song, or a movie, or a person, or a suite of memories. I mean, we do this all the time. But instead of going kind of tit for tat, one by one, and trying to, metatheoretically figure out how each piece fits into and like mechanistically kind of syncs up with others, we kind of get out of that kind of atomizing approach, sometimes called deficient modern approach, or kind of an extreme modern rationalism often, which we can highlight the unit or highlight the set or the system, but we usually do it at a distance where we're safe and we keep our own approach here and the system we're engaging with over here. And then there's this gap where we're not really syncing up with the thing that we're engaging, this object of our attention. And so this falling in love dynamic is we allow ourselves to kind of like lessen this gap of space. And instead, we kind of relax that and kind of let in this whole sweeping suite of all these living kind of like harmonious dynamics, and we sync up with all of them simultaneously because we're available for it, because we're receptive to it. And this is a beautiful thing. Like when we approach Dharma in a living way, we're trying to like poise our mind with a view in a meditation and conduct and fruition, and this is what we're trying to do. Like to allow the full spectrum of living experience in our heart, mind, and gut, of our body and our speech and our mind, to like relax and to comprehensively, systematically kind of like engage things in a more full ecological way. And this just saves so much time. This is like one of the specialties of Vajrayana, to sync up all these parts, these essential distilled metatheoretical kind of like insight nugget pith instructions. We're like cueing in our systems to kind of relax and sync up with each other so we can have more of this vivid, wakeful, falling in love, being with, unifying, harmonious interdynamic or interdependence with ourselves and others in the world. But not just staying in some kind of romanticized honeymoon version where everything's absolutized, but we give ourselves enough time, enough interest, enough kind of flexibility with like life and its dynamic movements to ebb and flow, go up and down, disperse and gather together. We like have a realistic relationship with our experience in a living ecology, and it doesn't have to be only the absolutized honeymoon version, kind of like manic Hollywood falling in love kind of version where it's always like hyper obsessed. Instead, it's much more relaxed, fluid, living, breathing, pattern, cyclical, kind of like it ebbs and it flows, it undulates, as living systems do. And so, to poise our mind, we take metatheoretical approach. In Buddhism, that's often called pith instruction. And that's a technique. What does a technique do? It helps us turn on or kind of relax into a view. And a view or a worldview is that poised state of mind, the middle way, where we're receptive to anything in the local living ecology of the outer and the inner and the in-between. Of all of it, we're trying to be receptive and sensitive in a like very fresh way where we're not exaggerating it, we're not deprecating or kind of subtracting from it, but we're just kind of glowing with the undulation of what is happening now, what is coming and what is going. And that's like a lived middle way view. We do that over time in a lineage setting. We actually let ourselves be shaped and informed or conformed by that living dynamic of the lineage. And over time we get versatile enough, stable enough to have an actual realistic relational experience with that suite of ecology, that set or system of practices and views of study and practice. We get relational enough, flexible enough, vividly inclusive enough that then that can start to sync up with other living ecologies at the same level of depth and comprehensive inclusivity. So that's like a deep, deep interconnective, integral approach. You could just say a lived embodied experience of the middle way, that then if it goes into a more tantric aspect, it includes pure body, pure speech, and pure mind. Not just what our duality mind fixates on as these separate objects that I'm viewing from a safe distance, but like when I soften that and not only see more subtle objects, so like subtle relative truth, not only that, that can be done impurely by sentient beings. Just look in a microscope or electron microscope, and we can get very, very subtle. But instead of that, or in addition to, we actually turn on a different mode, pure relative truth, of this pure perception. We go into a different mode from like, instead of like holding the fixation of duality mind, we relax that, release that into pure mind, pure body, pure speech, and we go into a different mode, which is much more aligned with how an enlightened being, a being who's totally free of that duality fixation, a being who's like actually saturated in a flexible, living, ongoing, glowing way of the middle way, like how they experience things. What's the refined or the much more vividly pure or non-dualistic, non-dual, non-separation obsessed? What's that experience like? What's it like to see like a Buddha, to hear like a Buddha, to kind of have a mind and awareness move like a Buddha's? That's all pure relative truth or pure perception. And this is like what Tantra is. and then we're integrating that pure perception, so pure body, pure speech, pure mind, in addition to the impure body, impure speech, impure mind, the duality sentient habits that we have, we're seeing a fuller scope of reality, both impure nightmares and pure kind of relative, kind of non-grasping being with dreamlike flexibility that these noble ones, arhats, bodhisattvas, and Buddhas have. Even if they're not put that way in Buddhist terms, like just that wisdom beings have. Actual beings abiding in the flexibility of the middle way. But that takes time. And then over time, we kind of are including that, both the Sutra and the Tantra approach, both the impure and the pure approaches. And still, we have to learn about other ecologies that we don't yet include, that we're not yet familiar with. And we have to let those different ecologies, those different lineages, the different sets of knowledge, give time to create their own connective or interconnective tissue, fabrics, like between themselves. And this is translineage, transdisciplinary. And so if we just take a dry, sterile, at a distance, 20,000 feet above bird's eye view with metatheoretical ways of first principles, and we see how these different ecologies sync up, we can do that on a first principle kind of metatheoretical level, but it won't be embodied in an integrative fashion. It won't be a deep, integral, interlineage connection. It'll just be surface at the level of first principles, or kind of these sterile, kind of almost mechanistic ways of seeing how things might sync up, but completely from an outsider perspective. And that's the risk of lineage. We actually have to surrender to it, to risk having our own boundary making, our own meaning making be shaped by staying place and going deep in one time, in one place, according to the kind of the guidance, the intelligence that we kind of cue into in that time and that place. And so we have to do that with a full-on heart of compassion, and a full-on mind of clear wisdom, and a full-on gut of like light touch, courageous, flexible dignity. And these three coming together, heart, head, and gut, that's what wisdom, compassion, and dignity, or skillful means, bringing all these together with a very long view oriented towards the omni-benefit of all beings, for every being to be happy and free, now and in the future, with whatever it takes, that I will learn to sync up with their ecologies, their ways of making sense and being in the world, their ways of knowing, being, and becoming. I will do whatever it takes to learn how to be in their ecology and sync up with that ecology and offer whatever is available on my side, on their side, to kind of have that ecology's own intelligence, its own wisdom, compassion, and power, to turn on from its own side. And then the nature is as it is, Buddha nature, it'll naturally manifest itself more fully, more integratively, more inclusively, more comprehensively. That's the Buddhist view, that there is this innate intelligence that's within each mind in all awareness. And if it's given enough supportive circumstances to have the life conditions be flourishing enough, that nature of mind will relax and actually brighten. It will be less restricted or bounded, which means it'll hold its own living context with deep care and precision, but it'll naturally also extend into other living contexts or ecologies and sync those up without mixing anything up. So it'll maintain the precision, the boundary making, the permeable membranes, but very much located in time and place of kind of the living lineage or the living ecology, the living kind of context, the living game or dream that it's a part of. It won't break the dream structure. It'll actually sync up with what's available in the living dream structure to have a more inclusive dream structure. And this middle way allows us the flexibility to do that, but it takes time. We take an general orienting approach with a middle way view or an integral view. Then we kind of land ourselves in a living ecology that deepens roots over time, and once it gets deep enough, we can start kind of like really exploring the depth of other living ecologies. And as those get deep, it creates these interconnections or interconnective tissue between ecologies. And then we get these interdisciplinary, interlineage or translineage approaches that aren't just dry and metatheoretically hovering above the lineages or hovering above the ecologies. It's actually creating these kind of phasing in and out liminal connective patterns between that don't break the internal integrity of any one lineage or set or system, but it actually weaves them together into larger wholes. And this weaving is a very delicate, very fragile, very evolutionary, long-term process that takes a very, very big view. And Buddhists call this the middle way. So I hope this is really helpful. It's definitely a very ongoing, active, open question in my own mind and my own heart. But how to preserve the lineage without becoming a fundamentalist. How to go deep in a spot without becoming exclusivist, but how to take a really juicy insider approach that's a lot of intelligence, that's not just surrendering its intelligence, it's surrendering its resistance to knowing more. It's surrendering its own fixation on its own set of duality habits. Instead, it's trying to sync up with an environment with a lot of love. And instead of trying to mechanically build that or design that one by one, these living ecologies are all already naturally integrative. So if we can have this suspended disbelief, this curious kind of what if, maybe kind of imaginative, kind of a leaning into, then the living ecologies, we can sync up with whole ecologies all at once. But then we have to actually do this transformative work over time and really restructure our own ways of being with in a much more full way. And over time, over even longer time, deeper time, that extends to even more systems of cause, condition, and effect. And we include these kind of greater living dynamics of lineages and the through lines between them that don't break the living internal ecology of any one system, but they only kind of offer even more integrative beauty to the reality that we can be with without kind of turning off, tuning out, getting going fundamentalist, or kind of fixating and kind of collapsing into me, my way only. So as bodhisattvas, we're trying to undo that habit, and we start doing it in one spot, and we get a little better at that, and we start extending that spot, but always caring for the very specific sets of cause, condition, and effect that happen within and without and in between. All right, thanks friends. Hope it's helpful. Tashule.